on the call at this point?
Can you hear me, Senator Strachan?
Hi, Becca. Yep, you're loud and clear.
Okay, great. Wanted you to know I'm with you.
Okay, thank you. How about our witnesses, Matt and Cameron? Are you with us? And Damien, I see Matt.
Good morning, Senator.
Good morning. I see Cameron. Damien, are you with us? Okay, so you don't have Damien or Senator Brock. Okay. Okay, let me just set out how I see the rest of the morning going. We'll work on S10 and other proposals on UI for the next half hour. And at 10:45, we'll switch over to mobile homes and go, no, at 10, it's 9:45 now. At 10:30, we'll switch over to mobile homes and go for an hour on mobile homes till we have to be on the floor. So let me get started here with, I guess, Cameron and Damien would be my first two folks. We have talked about several proposals that I know the governor mentioned in one of his speeches or both of his speeches, and also have been mentioned in this committee, and they deal with freezing the categories. Matt, or Cameron, I need a name for what levels 1 through 5 refer to. How do you say? I mean, you could say levels 1 to 5, but what's the generic thing they represent? Health of the trust fund, or how do you refer to?
Officially the tax rate schedules.
Okay, that's good enough. Tax rate schedules that reflect, however poorly or accurately, the solvency of the fund. Is that essentially what they try to do, right? They go up and down depending upon projected solvency in the fund. All right, so freezing the tax rate schedules, that's one idea. A subset of that is in the following year to limit any change in the tax rates to 2 categories. And I don't know if that proposal is just for 1 year or forevermore. And then freezing the taxable wage base, which is now at, I believe, 14.1 or thereabouts. And
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
leaving that for 1 year, and then returning to whatever the statutory provisions are. Those are 3 proposals, and as you know, I want to marry them with some help for claimants as well. Where are those in terms of, Damien's with us, where are those in terms of drafting? Have they been drafted? Are they in the budget bill? Has anybody sponsored them? What's going on in the House vis-a-vis them? Do we need a bill here for them, or we will make a decision whether to put them in S10 or not? Damien, you're probably as well versed to those questions as anybody, so why don't I open that to you?
Sure. I can't talk about other members' drafting requests, but I can say that I have language drafted on both the taxable wage base freeze and the delay in increases on the tax schedule. So I have the language drafted for both of those if it needs to go forward.
Well, yes, it does. I mean, in fact, I'm going to ask you to post it right now. So, but
I will put it into a document that I can post.
But it's not in the governor's budget somewhere in like the Department of Labor budget request, as far as you know? Cameron, do you know?
Not to my knowledge, Mr. Chair. I don't believe it has been requested to be there. We asked obviously the committees, to have something drafted so we could have the discussion. My understanding is it is not in a current active bill moving forward in the budget or any other.
Okay. Well, I don't know that there's any, as you say, you're not at liberty. I don't know that any senators are asking this to be drafted, but we are it's going to be a very primary topic of conversation in this committee. So with or without a bill, we might as well see the language that effectuates that proposal. So if we can pull that up, that would be great.
I will have that to the committee in just a second. I'm just cutting and pasting into a new document.
And just so the committee knows, I haven't decided yet whether, and we'll have some further conversations. I don't know if there's sidebar with the department or not, but whether we combine this all into S10 or whether there's pros and cons, advantages of doing these as separate bills. Believe me, I have not lost sight that we have put an incredible amount of time into S10 and it's on the verge of being ready to go. So we're not going to be able to deal with it today, but next week, I hope all these things will come together and we'll do two bills or we'll do one joint bill. But before we make those decisions, Senator Clarkson, I just want people to at least to get the beginning stages of understanding what the administration is proposing in their other UI changes and how much they impact the trust fund. So
Right.
That's why we'll do this preliminary walkthrough this morning. I don't know, as we're waiting for this to be pulled up, the people who are here on mobile homes, we're running late, and my guess is we'll be starting on mobile homes at about somewhere between 10:30 and, why don't you figure 10:30, okay? My apologies.
The screen depopulates.
Are we up, Nathan, Damien?
He's getting there.
Okay.
Well, on a happy note, the sun is out and it's like moving maybe beyond 10 degrees. Oh, I misspoke. It's still 7. Speaking of freezing things, I mean, that's where, my mind was in the freezing mode.
Yeah, we're doing a double freeze here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just emailed the language to everyone.
Thank
And Senator Clarkson, I have to say, if you're in single digits above 0, you're doing well this morning.
Oh, good. Are you still below 0? But
I haven't looked at the thermometer in a while, but it was -12 at my kid's school this morning. So, do you want me to pull the language up on the screen?
you just emailed it to us, right?
I did.
I'm fine. I'm fine with looking at my email because then I have
Yeah,
control.
me too.
Sure.
Because then we can see each other. It's always nicer to see each other.
Yep, it does. The language does two things. The first section basically says that for the benefit year beginning on July 1, 2021, the unemployment insurance contribution rate schedule would just remain at Schedule 1. And then the provisions of the section would not apply if on April 15th, 2021, the balance of the UI trust fund was either below $90 million or projected to drop below that amount on or before the end of 2021. And this is based on, this is actually identical to language that the department suggested last year. And the $90 million amount is their projection to make sure that they can make it through the first quarter of 2022 before they start receiving the bulk of their contributions for 2022. So,
So
this,
my
Yeah.
recollection is that I thought we were dealing with last year a request that it go no higher than Schedule 3.
so
That's what I remember also. Yeah.
you're correct on that. So the request here was to keep it at Schedule 1 for a year, if I understood the department's request correctly. But I'll let Cameron comment on that.
No, I was just commenting on you saying this was identical to last year.
It's not.
I meant I'm sorry, I meant the language there about the safety valve.
Okay,
I misspoke.
okay. Let's go to the section 2 and then we'll talk to Matt and Cameron about this.
Sure.
May I just ask a quick question, Michael?
Absolutely. I'm sorry, not on.
So no, it's just curious, why is 90 million the safety valve? What can it accomplish or not accomplish at 90 million? Why is that the magic number?
Let's leave that till he
Okay.
finishes this, and then we're going to have Cameron and Matt talk about all those kinds of questions.
Okay.
It's an excellent question. We need to know. Okay.
So the second section is new language here, and this would hold the base of contributions for calendar year 2022 at the same amount as they are this year for calendar year 2021. So contributions this year are due on the first $14,100 of each employee's wages, and that would remain the same for calendar year 2022 instead of having its normal inflationary increase that's set forth in the statute. And Matt or Cameron can tell you exactly what that would go to, but my understanding is it would raise it to a few $100s or several $100s higher than it is this year. And this would hold it flat at $14,100. It has essentially the same safety valve language in there regarding the $90 million. But the difference is the calculation is done on October 15th, 2021, because this is going into effect on next January 1st. And so the idea here is that they'll do an end of the year check to make sure that there's enough money in the trust fund before they do this. And that's it for the walkthrough. Cameron and Matt can talk more about the trust fund issues, why 90 million is important and what the impacts would be.
Okay. Thank you, Damien. So this is going to be a brief overview in the next half hour, but we're going to get into numbers here. Let's just start with section 1. Recall we talked about when the proposal that came over from the House last year had us going from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. That was going to reduce contributions to the trust fund by $36 million. So Matt, do you have a number that's different than $36 million by staying at Schedule 1?
Good morning, everyone. For the record, I'm Matthew Berowitz, the Director of the Economic and Labor Market Information Division. Is my audio not okay, Senator Clarkson?
Your audio is kind of challenging. It's very it's got a lot of reverb in it. Am I the only one experiencing that?
No, I think we need to merge his audio with Doug Hoffer's audio.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it would, that would have been great.
Now, go ahead. We can hear you very loud.
You are loud and fuzzy, but loud.
I'll try and take down the reverb. Where were we? Yes, I think for the most part, yes, that approximation about what the difference between Schedule 1 and Schedule 3 is about the same as was previously discussed in September of 2020 during prior testimony. Our legislative liaison, Amanda Wheeler, did send over the updated forecast this morning to Nathan. So you should all have the updated table so you can compare what the administration's proposal would do to the trust fund relative to the base forecast.
Okay, I haven't seen.
Should we pull that up?
Yeah, I have not
It's
seen.
posted.
Okay.
Oh, it's posted. Thank you, Nathan.
Can we put that on the screen, Nathan? Who can control that screen? Now I don't hear anything.
I'd be happy
Sorry.
to share my screen if that's helpful.
Yes, Matt, if you could do that, that'd be fantastic.
So hopefully what you see coming through is a similar table to what you've seen in the annual report, except in red it says proposed change, a freeze of Schedule 1, a limit of a 2 schedule increase, and a freeze of the taxable wage base of $14,100. I know Damien was putting together that language rather quickly as it relates to the proposal, but it is still my understanding that the administration has both of those proposals in there regarding the taxable, the tax rate schedule, which is to freeze it at Schedule 1 for 1 year, plus include some language that would say it cannot increase more than 2 schedules in any given year. So as you see here in column E, the tax rate schedule for 2020, which was the lowest tax rate schedule, Schedule 1. This proposed change would say, let's hold it at tax rate Schedule 1 in 2021. And then the provision not allowing any schedule to increase more than 2 would kick in 2022, because as we previously discussed, the trust fund is going to look at the historically worst year in the last 10 years, which is hopefully going to be 2020 for a long time, and would have jumped to Schedule 5 immediately. But instead, that provision of a limit of 2 schedule increase would kick in 2022. So it would go 1135 instead of 15, as was displayed in the annual trust fund report. And I think to the chair's point, contributions here are forecasted to be 108 million as opposed to the 146 million as initially proposed. So that's about that's about $38 million difference or $37 million difference.
Okay, I'm a little lost. So you're saying that Schedule 1 versus going to Schedule 3 only loses the trust fund $2 million? Because last year you said 36 million.
Right.
Yeah, no, I didn't say that. So let me start again. Just from step by step here, the freeze of Schedule 1 into 2021 would change the level of contributions from 146 million, a projected 146 million, to a projected 108 million. So that would be about $38 million difference, which is in the ballpark of the $36 million you mentioned, Mr. Chair, from our discussions in September. So the contributions for just holding it at Schedule 1 would be impacted by about $38 million for just holding it at Schedule 1. Then you would move out to Schedule, if you're talking about what is the impact of reducing it or preventing the schedule increase from 1 to 5 and including an intermediate step of Schedule 3, I'd have to do the quick math on that, but it is again going to be something to the tune of probably around $30 million. So let's see if I'm not sure if you're able to see when I toggle, but in 2022, We initially forecasted $183 million in contributions because this would have been the second year we would have been at tax rate Schedule 5. In the new proposed, it would be at 126 million. So it's cumulative, so it's building. So it's about a 60 million increase, which again would be about another $30 million that we would be postponing to the contributions into the trust fund. Again, these are just being postponed because ultimately this money will be made up in the back half of this forecast. So what it is, as opposed to ramping up contributions, kind of like a spike from tax rate Schedule 1 all the way to tax Schedule 5, we're adding or the proposal from the administration is adding another year of 1, adding an intermediate step of Schedule 3, and then going to Schedule 5. Ultimately, it will go to Schedule 5. Ultimately, the contributions will ramp up, but it is just how fast the contributions ramp up. So this money will be collected on the back end, just not in the front end.
And the numbers you have here for contributions also reflect the change in policy of freezing the taxable wage base for 1 year, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
So what we're going to need here, I don't know if you go down, you've already done this, but we want to see side by side with color and stuff, what this would look like with no legislative changes.
If you're still able to see my screen, this is the report we submitted at the end of January, and this would be with no legislative changes.
I don't see that.
Yeah, we see the proposal, not the.
Okay, so I will stop sharing and then I will start sharing again, and I will switch over to the.
And Matt, whatever you did to your sound is much better. Thank you.
I wish I could take credit. Technology these days, right?
Well, take credit.
Okay, so this would be what was initially submitted to you at the end of January. This is the no administrative changes. So you see that it goes from Schedule 1 to Schedule 5. The tax rate, taxable wage base increases in 2022. And so, you know, we see that as opposed to ramping up, I think I'll just leave it at that. So this would be the side by side, and we could compare the difference in contributions or ultimately the difference in the unemployment insurance trust fund. The benefits between both of these scenarios are the same. The base forecast submitted in the January report, as well as the administrative proposal that we were just discussing. In both cases, the benefits paid is the same. The only modifications are to the contribution side of the house.
Correct. So for the next time we meet on this, can you combine these charts so we can see a side by side, like where it says contributions as is, and then next to it, contributions under the administration's proposal, and just have them next to each other so we don't have to toggle back and forth?
Happy to do so.
Okay. And maybe also, if you can do a third column of the proposal from last year to just do the change in the taxable wage base by 2 categories as opposed to the freeze and what that would look like.
Okay.
In terms of the taxable wage base, is freezing it, is that have just a 1-year effect? Or, I mean, I know we can do whatever we want, we can change the law, but if we just put in there that says it freezes 1 year and then goes back to the statutory formula or requirements in the future, is it a 1-year hit to the trust fund, or is it baked in that forevermore we're going to be getting less in the trust fund going forward each year?
That is a great question. I'm thinking of my calculus here, how how that would work. But basically, because it's indexed on top of each other, it would be always 1 year lower than what it would be in the future. So in the proposal, since I'm still screen sharing the original forecast, no changes, January 2021, you know, all of this gets kind of moved out 1 year. So we would propose, you know, so So the contribution rates themselves are still increasing. It would just still be at a lower rate. So in 2022, it would be 14.1. In 2023, it would be 14.6 as opposed to 15.1. So I think does that answer your question, sir?
I think it does. It sounds like it's baked in, and there's a reduction every year going forward as a result of what it would be from if we left it at the status quo. Correct me if I'm wrong, I may not articulate this well, but we could easily freeze the wage base this year and return to where it would have been under existing law as opposed to following an increase in the formula. So if this is existing law here, we could say in 2020, I'm not sure the timing, but we could basically say we go back up to where we would have been under the law, under current law, as if we didn't have the freeze. And therefore we would get a 1-year freeze, a 1-year reduction in benefit, as opposed to recurring that savings every single year going forward.
I think that's correct. So in essence, again, we're looking at the original unaltered forecast here. So in essence, we'd say, a 1-year pause would say 14,100 in 2021 and then 14,100 again in 2022. But when it came time to calculate the 2023 based on the scenario you laid out, we would actually incorporate the 2 years and get it back to the 15,100 as opposed to pushing it out, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah. I don't know how clearly to articulate it, but the question is, are we doing a freeze for a 1-year temporary benefit, or are we going to continue that benefit forever more? So every year there is a benefit of the first year gets recaptured in every year going forward. We'll have to just see the numbers and we'll get there. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
I know we're short on time. I was just trying to understand, and maybe it's a reminder for me, if $90 million is some kind of magical threshold, or it's just the number we've all determined somehow keeps the fund solvent in case there's another mass unemployment event.
Right. I asked that question,
Right.
and we were going to deal with it at some point.
So that's
Oh, yeah.
That's the question I asked, which is
That's the next area that I want to get into in the next 15 minutes is the solvency of the fund and what's a safe number, and talk about this 90 million, how it's calculated, how it was suggested. But if you could pull up the governor's proposal again and just walk us through, as opposed to existing law, what is the range? It doesn't look like the range of difference in the UI trust fund is all that much. And it seems pretty, from the numbers that I've been used to, it seems pretty healthy here.
right.
Agreed. Yeah, I would agree with your summary of that, because again, all we're doing is pushing, we're basically taking, instead of ramping up contributions very quickly in the first year or two post the pandemic, we're creating a little bit of a ramp up period, but ultimately the contributions will come in, and assuming that, as these forecasts kind of do, that the economy kind of returns to a normal level of unemployment activity, the contributions that will come in will far exceed the benefits paid out, allowing for the trust fund to return to health. So even with this proposed freeze of the schedule, the limit of the 2 schedule increase, the freeze of the taxable wage base, by the end of 2031, there's only a difference of about $20 million, maybe even a little less, because it does catch up. So we're just kind of stalling. The money, as I said, still comes into the fund. It's just, when do we want it to come in? Do we want it to come in fast and hard early, or will we allow that gradual approach? Well, there's still some uncertainty about how the recovery will proceed, to allow employers to get their footing under them before the contributions really start ramping up.
So it's the lowest you have the trust fund at the moment is 196, which is that roughly where it is now?
We are currently at about 233 million.
Oh,
give or
okay,
take,
so
2 or 3.
at what point in 2021 are you predicting it'll go down to 196?
That is a end of year balance in 2021. And again, this is based on the administrative change, right? So we have actually contributions would only be about 108 million versus benefits paid out of 158 million. In the non-change, it is still cash negative in 2021, but much less so. And I see Senator Brock has raised his hand.
I'm sorry, Senator Brock.
I did. What's the worst case? If, for example, the South African variant is found to be immune to the vaccine and the pandemic continues with further tie down or tightening for another year, what would happen?
That is a great question. So when the pandemic initially hit, I think of ourselves at, let's call it full employment for brevity. We had a very low unemployment rate. We had a high labor force participation rate, and the pandemic hit. It disrupts all economic linkages across the board. That's really not even an exaggeration. And that causes a mass disruption, and it ultimately leads to the benefit payouts of nearly $400 million in 2020. So if a variation or a strand or the virus itself just resurges here in 2021, it doesn't seem like it would even get back to that level because we have not got back to full employment. We are still 10% down, approximately 9% down in employment. And so there's individuals still who have not gone back to work, and so they can't be laid off a second time. So I believe even with a resurgence of the virus, at least from the standpoint of the health of the trust fund, I'm not talking about the health of the economy or the mental health of our population, but from the health of the trust fund standpoint, it would not be as large of an impact because we are coming at it from an already disrupted place. So this forecast
modeling in terms of just the various scenarios that could occur.
Could you repeat that, sir?
Have you done any modeling as to the various scenarios that could occur to actually define what the worst case would be?
Yes, I've done some. Obviously, this is a situation where it's difficult to understand the worst case scenario because I could not have predicted this worst case scenario. It's been so bad. But looking at current expenditure rates, current levels of unemployment, I could see a worst case scenario of benefit payouts of $200 million in 2021. That said, I could also see it much lower than the 158 presented here as well. So I think on the upside, you probably have about $40 million on, maybe even just a plus minus $40 million for benefits paid in 2021 to answer your question about, how much play there's at here.
All right, thank you.
Can I just make an overall observation here? And I don't know if you were around enough, Matt, in 2010, or Cameron has a history here, but these numbers are surprising to me. And it sort of leads me to believe like we overshot. Somebody please put their mute on. We overshot our estimates both in terms of benefit cuts in 2010 and tax increases in 2010. These numbers look very unfamiliar to me. It seems like we would have been giddy if we had a trust fund of $300 million. And now we're talking of a trust fund of $1 billion.
Yeah.
Do you share that? And how do we look compared to other states? I know there's a lot of other metrics involved, but is our trust fund in some ways too healthy? Do we have too much money in the bank for workers and employers' needs here?
That ultimately is a great public policy question. I will say, coming into this economic downturn, we had one of the healthiest trust funds in the country. I haven't compared it recently, and it's very difficult to compare states right now because some states used a lot of their CARES Act money to put right into their trust fund to help it from, falling down. So it does become an interesting discussion of what is the appropriate amount, just from the standpoint of the grand bargain. When we froze benefits, there was a point in time and said, okay, once we get back to Schedule 3, we are going to reindex benefits back to where they should have been had there never been a freeze. So we kind of got the benefits back on the right track, but there was other than the triggers associated with dropping the taxable wage base down $2,000 or $2,000 if it hits Schedule 3 or $2,000 if it hits Schedule 1. There's never been like a rebalancing back of the taxable wage base, and most would agree that there shouldn't be, but ultimately where we're at about $16,000 or $14,000 taxable wage base, we're double where we were before the grand bargain. So that has kind of been a legacy that's held on, is the taxable wage base has been doubled, which ultimately leads to much higher levels of contributions. And I think a lot of people agreed before the grand bargain there needed to be something done on the contribution side because it hadn't changed. Benefits have been indexing up, but the taxable wage base hadn't. And so to your point, Mr. Chair, it's possible that, after 10 years of indexing up taxable wage base, we might be looking at a situation of, maybe we are starting to run a little hot in terms of the contributions. It does look, that we survived the pandemic well, but now how do we set ourselves up for the next decade or the next 2 decades? And I think that is some of the conversation that we've tried to lay out here of, is $1 enough in the trust fund? Is $1 billion enough in the trust fund? Or, previously it was 300 million. And then just before the pandemic, it was, maybe 500 is too much. So we do have to kind of narrow it in between $1 and $1 billion, or maybe 300 to 500. Those have been numbers mentioned.
May I just add something here, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
It's Allison. I think this is interesting. I mean, and there are a lot of assumptions. I mean, for example, $1 billion in 10 years, if we got no federal assistance and had to survive another major impact on the UI trust fund alone, that might be an appropriate amount in 10 years.
Right.
It's I think as we discuss this going forward, we have to think of some of the assumptions we're making. And one of the benefits of this year is the huge amount of assistance we got from the feds.
Absolutely. Well, that's the kind of stuff we're going to get into. Before we close out today, I want to talk about the 90 million. Can you tell us how you got there and how it will work? It gets very confusing. And Cameron, maybe you jump in between calendar year, benefit year, the first quarter. 90 million seems kind of thin to me to call this off. It seems like if we got down to that level, we may be approaching a negative balance in the trust fund. And it just, at least instinctively, if we're going to have I think Damien called it a safe harbor or something, it seems like it might be a little low and risky. So can you talk about that? I don't know if it's you or Matt that should talk about that. I'm not hearing you, Cameron.
Cameron, you're muted somehow.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Okay. Matt, you want me to jump in or?
That's fine, either way.
Okay. So when we were here last September, right, and a little bit of context here for Senator Rahm, we were here last September. Mr. Chair, you mentioned we were talking about limiting the increase from going from 1 to 5 to just 1 to 3 potentially was the conversation. And the concern at the time collectively was, we didn't know what COVID was going to look like over the winter. And our concern from the department's perspective was making sure that we had something in place to give employers a little bit of assurance, and also our concerns about the timeframes. The tax schedule increases in July, but we need to have this decision made by the end of March in order for us to do the work up front to make sure the tax rate schedule is set, because it takes us a few months to do that work. So the concern was,
Sir? I'm still committed to getting there on time.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I absolutely do, and I know you are. I know you are, and why we appreciate this discussion, right now. So, with that, when we were talking about making the change last September, the concern was making sure that there is enough money in the trust fund to last us through the first quarter of the calendar year, because the legislature's not in session at the end of the year, and you are in session at the beginning of the year. And so making sure that we weren't changing the law, and we wanted to have the opportunity to claw that change back if the trust fund took a nosedive before the legislature had the opportunity to come back and make a legislative change. And so when we were in September, and we were advocating the approach, what we said was, because if you remember, Mr. Chair, we were also talking about the taxable wage base adjusting, which that takes effect in January, not in July. And so the trigger we were discussing with the committees in September was, if we felt confident that $90 million was a sufficient amount of money in the trust fund at the time, based on the claims volume we had at that time. So what we looked at was just how many claims do we have, what is our average weekly benefit amount at the time, and extrapolating that out, how much money would we need to last us through the first quarter of 2021 in order to have enough money and not have to borrow for the first quarter. Because keeping in mind, our biggest contribution quarter is the first quarter, because that's when employers are paying on the taxable wage base. So we bring our biggest amount of contributions in April. And so we were trying to look at, what do we need to get us through the winter? And so when we were discussing with Damien about the language here, we wanted to just bring that threshold over, because that was the conversation what we left it at in September. So the 90 million is just the baseline that we had last September, and we would want to have that conversation about whether or not 90 million is too much or too little. But the concept is, we need to have enough money in the balance of the trust fund going into the first quarter of what would now be 2022 to make sure that the decisions we're making now, we're able to adjust those decisions before they get set. And so that's why the trigger for the tax schedule increase, which goes into effect in July, the trigger for that is April. And the trigger for keeping the taxable wage base at 14.1, because that gets set January of 2022, that trigger is in October. And so we tried to give ourselves the trigger with a long enough roadway to pull back the decision if the trust fund balance by the end of the year isn't going to be sufficient enough to get us through the first quarter of next year. Understanding that when we get to next January, the legislature's back, we have the opportunity to do some emergency changes if we need to. But we just need enough money in the trust fund to get us through the first quarter to get that large contribution amount in April, and then we can make any changes necessary.
Thank you for that. It's a very complicated thing to explain. You did a good job.
Yep.
But what I'm left with is, you've got a figure of $90 million that's precariously close. It'll cover us for the first quarter, maybe. For one quarter, but then you're going to throw it back into our laps in the first quarter to pass a law to raise taxes and change the law around. Why wouldn't we take a more conservative view and say, let's not let these new laws drop rates and contributions, increase benefits, whatever we do, with a bigger cushion, rather than set ourselves up for the fact that we could, we become the bad guys and then we have to like have people scurry and change things. And so it seems awful low. It doesn't seem like it's very likely at this point with the numbers I see that we're ever going to get there, but it still seems kind of low.
Right.
Totally understood, Mr. Chair. And I think, I understand your concern, both, the time frame perspective, and please know it wouldn't be our intention to throw that on you guys in that sense. And so I think it's just finding where that threshold is. I mean, I've kind of said it publicly, from my personal perspective, as long as we have $1 in the trust fund and then we start to build it back up, we've won, if you will. And so, I understand if 90 million is not where the committee would be comfortable. I think our concern is we wouldn't want it to be too high to where the trigger keeps us from accomplishing our goal, which is trying to keep the contributions low for employers right now through this recovery. And knowing also, for the committee, when you look at our benefits paid out versus contributions paid in, the summer is obviously are the months in which our benefits are lowest. So our thought behind that is totally understanding we don't want to be scrambling in the middle of the winter to make changes, knowing that during the summer is really when the benefits paid out is least. So
we're going to end. I'm clearly a geek on this UI stuff, but I don't want to be dealing with this issue again next year. So get it right now this year.
Well, you've become such a whiz at it. It's like growing our skill base here.
Okay, so let's Cameron, we're really running late.
Yeah, I just want to make one quick comment, Mr. Chair. I just want to say I sent you and the committee an email. If you guys can take a look at it, there are some CARES Act extensions that we would like to discuss with the committee about how we can potentially, because of the CARES Act extension that was passed, there may need to be some legislative changes we need to help protect UI recipients. So I just wanted to comment on it. I had the opportunity with you visually to just tell you I sent you an email and we can talk about it next week.
Thank you. Thank you all. We're going to take a 5-minute break. I'm sorry for the mobile home folks, but it's been one of those mornings. 5 minutes and we'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.